Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A jury finds 3 men guilty for their involvement in the 2022 Coutts border blockade, and we have reaction from the accused. The province unveiled a new compensation model for Alberta doctors, but will it keep them here? And we dive into how the federal budget will affect small and medium-sized businesses.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Jurors deliberated for just 3 hours before finding 3 men guilty for their roles in the 2022 highway blockade at the Coutts border crossing. The trial for Alex Van Herk, Gerhard George Jansen, and Marco Van Hugenbos lasted just under 2.5 weeks. Now, on Tuesday at around 8:30 p.m., 6 men and 6 women delivered their verdict. The 3 were found guilty on 1 count each of mischief over $5,000 for their involvement in a protest over COVID-19 government pandemic restrictions. Now, the accused were free to leave the courthouse, but could face up to 10 years in prison and will be sentenced at a later date. Now, we had a chance to chat with Marco Van Hugenbos, who says he wasn't surprised by the verdict, but still stands behind what he did.
I believe I did the right thing. There are regrets in relation to things or decisions, how things went or decisions I made, but there is there can be no regret for what Coutts was and for what has come out of Coutts. And people can struggle with the tactics, but the cause was right. And look what we knew then versus what we know now in relation to the COVID regime in this province and what has come out of Coutts, the conviction is stronger than ever.
Van Hugenbos is a former town councillor from Fort Macleod, and he's married with 4 young children. He and his co-accused will return to court July 22nd to hear a sentencing date. Now, just after the verdict was read, Alex Van Herk told reporters outside of the courthouse that he too stands behind what he did at the border, but says the judicial system simply did its job.
Our judicial system did its job. Do we agree with it? No, we can never agree with it, especially on the fight that we're fighting. The act of mischief, I guess mischief was caused in Coutts, and if the jury deems us as be participants of that and the leaders of that, then I guess I'll stand for that. I just hope there's accountability coming forward from this for the politicians, that why we had to go there. There's a reason we went there. I mean, what was happening in our country, in our province at that time that forced good people to do uncivil things to be heard. We tried every other avenue. We tried contacting our MLAs or every level of government. They weren't listening. So it's sad that we have to take them kind of measures to be heard, and I guess accountability needs to be there. So I guess, I'm proud of it.
The Trudeau government says it met all of its fiscal goals in Tuesday's federal budget. Now, that includes keeping the $40 billion deficit from rising, even as it introduced tens of billions of dollars in new spending. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says his party will not support the federal budget.
The 9th deficit after the Prime Minister promised the budget would balance itself. And what did he do with the money? Everything he spent on has become more expensive. He's doubled the rent, doubled mortgage payments, doubled the needed down payment for a home, forced 35 homeless encampments in Halifax alone. 1 in 4 kids cannot afford food. And now he's adding $40 billion of new debt and new spending. That's $2,400 of new inflation. That is why Conservatives will vote against this wasteful inflationary budget that is like a pyromaniac spraying gas on the inflationary fire that he lit. It is getting too hot and too expensive for Canadians.
Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas also weighed in on the Liberals' recently tabled budget, and she wasn't impressed with it either, and explains why.
I think really what stuck out to me about this budget is, first off, we need to acknowledge that it's the 9th year that Trudeau has promised to balance the budget and hasn't. It's another deficit being incurred by Canadians. And of course, we know that the amount that is spent just on servicing that debt alone is equivalent to the amount that the government collects in GST per year. So imagine that. All of the GST that we're paying is just going to service our debt. But I think what's also important to understand is that, of course, this is more debt, yes, but also higher taxes and higher costs for Canadians. And right now, Canadians are squeezed and they just can't afford more. I recently got a phone call from a mom who was a part of a mom's group, and she shared with me that the overwhelming conversation taking place was just around affordability, whether it was gas or groceries or diapers for children or formula for babies. Families are really hard done by and just having a really difficult time making ends meet. And unfortunately, Budget 2024 is only going to add to the debt load that individual households are experiencing and the difficult times that they're having.
Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh thinks the federal government didn't focus on the true cause of inflation in the budget. He says he hasn't yet decided what his party's next move will be.
The Liberals failed to address the major reason why things are so expensive. That's corporate greed. They did not take the opportunity to take on corporate greed with the wealth tax on the excess profits of oil and gas companies, of corporate grocery store companies that are making record profits. So they chose not to do that.
The Assembly of First Nations held a news conference in our nation's capital to discuss Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland's budget. AFN National Chief Cindy Woodhouse says after going through the close to 500-page document, she says it falls flat in a number of areas.
Analyzing the budget's proposals for housing, policing, roads, and water fall far short of closing the long-standing infrastructure gaps that create so many difficulties for First Nations people. Last week, the Assembly of First Nations and the federal government co-released a report identifying the infrastructure gap among First Nations to be over $350 billion. Earlier this month, Canada's Auditor General released 2 reports detailing a distressing and persistent pattern of failure in federal First Nation housing and police programs. These reports, with the result of the Saskatchewan mass stabbing inquiry, demonstrate long-term investments and fundamental shifts in approach are required over an extended period.
Now, as part of Budget 2024, the Liberals say they will provide more than $2.5 billion in rebate checks to around 600,000 small and medium-sized businesses across the country. Now, here in Alberta, that breaks down to about $718 million. Andrew Senya of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business says there are both positives and negatives with this budget.
We're quite happy in a sense that there's no additional requirements. The federal government had originally said that it was going to be emissions intensive trade exposed industries. We're glad that it's going to all industries. And we anticipate about 175,000 businesses will qualify. That was what was promised almost 5 years ago, and we're only getting it now. It's better late than never. Some of the concerns we have are obviously, next year you're going to see, employment insurance go up. You're going to see the carbon tax go up. You're going to see alcohol taxes go up. So again, there's positives, but there's also some negatives with regards to the budget.
Budget 2024 also included help for first-time home buyers. The amortization period for mortgages on new builds has been extended to 30 years. The CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, Trevor Lewington, says that should help younger people who are looking to purchase their very first home.
Allowing younger people better access to mortgages and extending that amortization period potentially makes housing more accessible, so that's good news. The budget did contain some incentives for rural healthcare professionals. So there are some tax incentives for practitioners in rural markets, which hopefully will help us with attracting medical physician profession to rural Alberta. That's good news. There was a very probably unnoticed announcement in the budget, but they're actually doubling the size of the volunteer firefighter tax credit. And most of the departments in our region are in fact all staffed by volunteers. So being able to provide an increased tax deduction for those folks, I think, is actually a small win.
The provincial government, along with the Alberta Medical Association, have developed a new compensation model for family physicians and rural generalists. It'll support doctors working on a panel in a team environment, so the right provider delivers the right care to help more patients when and where they need it. The province says the minimum panel size needs to be determined, as does the rates they'll be paid. Alberta Health Minister Adriana LaGrange says this model will come into effect once rates are agreed upon, and that she anticipates this will make Alberta a world leader in health care.
This is the kind of care where a patient has a regular family doctor, who they can develop a long-term relationship with, and who works with them to ensure their care needs are met through all of the phases of their lives. While we are still confirming all the details, we have agreed on a framework model that will recognize the unique work of family medicine and rural generalist physicians. It will be a new physician compensation model for family medicine and rural generalist physicians who are remunerated now through a fee-for-service or other alternative physician compensation model.
This new payment model is going to provide a powerful new option for physician practices, one that will make it possible for doctors to stay in comprehensive care in this province, and for more and more physicians to come into this province and be recruited, and to incentivize and to bring back Alberta as a place where physicians want to come work and set up their practices for longitudinal comprehensive family medicine.
As you've heard on Bridge City News, the former mayor of Calgary, Naheed Nenshi, has thrown his hat into the political ring as he joined the Alberta NDP leadership race. He recently shared with BCN that he really wants to help people to see how the Alberta NDP shares Albertans' values.
You know, when we think about strong delivery of public services by the public sector, when we think about looking after the most vulnerable, not punching down on them, giving people a hand up at the moment they need it, fostering a strong economy with a solid eye on the books, all of that, while we're dealing with ensuring that every single Albertan has a life of dignity and prosperity on this land. When you think about those are things that most Albertans believe in, but they're also things that the NDP believes in.
Catch more of Naheed Nenshi's interview with BCN's Naveen Day coming up after Business News. 9 people have been arrested and 19 charges have been laid following the heist of nearly $24 million in gold and foreign currency from Toronto's Pearson Airport exactly 1 year ago. The investigation was dubbed Project 24 Carat. Now, police held a news conference on Wednesday to offer up more details of the heist.
The suspect was carrying a fraudulent airway bill as he approached the warehouse. The image you see is the actual airway bill that the suspect produced. The airway bill is for a legitimate shipment of seafood that was picked up the day before. This duplicate airway bill was printed off from a printer within Air Canada Cargo. Once inside the warehouse, the suspect provided it to Air Canada Cargo warehouse attendant. A short time later, a forklift arrived with a container of gold and foreign currency and loaded it into the rear of the suspect's truck. The suspect then drives away. At approximately 9:30 p.m. that same evening, Brinks Canada employees attended Air Canada Cargo to pick up the shipment of gold and currency. Air Canada employees tried to locate the container, realized it was missing, and began an internal investigation.
The Joint Task Force investigation also interrupted an attempt to bring 65 firearms into Canada from the United States. Now, police have only recovered about $90,000 worth of gold, which had been fashioned into crude bangle bracelets. That leaves more than $20 million unaccounted for. 3 people are still wanted on Canada-wide warrants, including a former manager with Air Canada. Lethbridge police have laid charges after a 41-year-old man was caught in the act trying to collect money from a senior citizen targeted in a grandparent scam. The victim, a 75-year-old woman, had previously been contacted by the man posing as a lawyer who claimed her grandson had been involved in a collision, was arrested, and required money for bail. Now, she gave away $3,400 to someone who came to her home to collect, then received another call from a fake lawyer telling her the amount she gave was not enough. She later found out from family members that her grandson was not in any trouble and that she called police. While police were at her home, the woman received another phone call from the fake lawyer who returned to her home to obtain the cash. Dimitar Stamatov was arrested at the scene of the crime. Students from an array of Lethbridge secondary schools got some hands-on experience at a variety of work trades on Wednesday. BCN's Naveen Day was at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center to see a unique concept called career speed dating.
Career Transitions is an organization that works with 67 schools in southwestern Alberta. Their goal is to introduce students to careers and occupations to arm them with information to make course selection and career choices once they graduate high school. On Wednesday, they held their EPIC Day, which stands for Exploring Possible Industries and Careers. Executive Director for Career Transitions Judy Stolk-Ingram says the event helps young people expand their horizon of possibilities.
We just want students to be aware that there are so many different occupations out there that they haven't, that they might not know about, and to start to think about what resonates for them. What do they like? What are they drawn to? What are they not? What are they not interested in? So that hopefully, as they go through high school, they can start making the best possible choices for themselves.
Students are placed in one of 11 zones, just like the one behind me, each filled with organizations from a variety of fields such as trades, health, STEM, agriculture and environment, and one wild card field. Then the students are divided into groups of 6 and spend 20 minutes with each organization to see what they have to offer. Stolk-Ingram calls this concept career speed dating, and she says the feedback from students has been positive.
I didn't know that really I could change careers, which is really important, right? Nobody has to make a decision when they're 15 as to what they're going to retire from. Other feedback is, like, I didn't know there were so many options out there. I didn't know anything about trades. I didn't know that you could pay your way.
Southland Trailer Corp is among the largest employers down here in southern Alberta. They say events like these target the type of talent they are looking for.
We hire a lot of younger people, and the work that we do really tailors to the youth. We like to have a lot of fun when we're working. We like to listen to a lot of music while we're working. And just generally is a youthful environment. It's a physical job, and the youth usually be able to keep up really well at that. TJ
Dow adds their presence at last year's event brought in numerous resumes.
A lot of students interested in the trades, from welding to culinary to plumbing. We offer it all at Southland, and we had a lot of students come through after the event last year.
The event is funded through school divisions, post-secondary institutions, as well as corporate sponsors. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
Career speed dating. I have to tell my kids about that. Great. Well, it was cloudy and cooler again today in Lethbridge, and the cooler temperatures will remain with us, including some very chilly overnight lows. A full look at the weather pictures on deck. We saw more light flurries and colder temperatures again today across much of southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it looks pretty chilly over the next few days, especially with the overnight lows.
Yeah, Hal, the overnight lows are certainly much cooler than the seasonal cold, the seasonal average for this time of year. Some getting as low as -10 there on Friday night. And then even the daytime highs, we're not going to see it get back into above seasonal until we get into next week. So we are looking at a high of 4 degrees. Finally, those clouds are going to clear up by tomorrow. We are still expecting a 30 to 50K wind on Thursday. And then as we get into Friday, mainly cloudy skies, but only a high of 3, up to 8 on a Saturday, 9 on Sunday with mainly cloudy skies. And then there's those teens happening as we get into next week. Monday, high of 16, and then high of 18 rather on Tuesday with partly cloudy skies. Now the average high for this time of year, 13, average low -125. That was our high temperature on this day. That happened back in 1980. And the chilly record for this day was -12. That happened in 1953. Sun rose this morning at 6:33, and our sun is set this evening at 8:29. We are about 4 minutes shy of 14 minutes, so we're looking at 13 hours 56 minutes of a daylight, 3 minutes longer than we saw yesterday. West Coast, a very sunny one, high of 15 degrees in Victoria. Same thing for Vancouver. Edmonton sitting at only 1 tomorrow, partly cloudy skies with increasing clouds throughout the day. And then Calgary with clear skies tomorrow, but a high of 2 degrees. Now we're seeing more snow as we get into the rest of the prairies. Saskatoon looking at 2 to 4 centimeters, -3 for a high, -2 in Regina. That is cooler than the average low for this time of year. Here periods of snow expected in both Regina and Winnipeg tomorrow, high of 4 in Winnipeg. Winnipeg also could see a few showers with those flurries as well. 40% chance of showers expected tomorrow in Toronto, high of 17 degrees, 11 for a high in Ottawa, and 13 is the expected high tomorrow in Montreal. Both of those cities expecting periods of rain tomorrow. As we get into Atlantic Canada, things are clearing up quite a little bit, especially in Fredericton. Nice sunny skies, 12 for a high. Partly cloudy skies in Halifax, 9 for a high there, and high of 3 degrees in Charlottetown. Now, St. John's is the one to watch because we are expecting 5 millimeters of rain and 2 to 4 centimeters of snow as well, with a high of 2 degrees. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Ottawa is setting aside $2.4 billion in the upcoming federal budget to build capacity in artificial intelligence. The bulk of the money is going towards improving access to computing capabilities and technical infrastructure. Another $50 million over 5 years will support workers who could be affected by artificial intelligence, including in the creative industries. The government also plans to fund a new AI Safety Institute of Canada and Transport Canada technology to use AI to screen Canada-bound air cargo. A natural gas pipeline owned by TC Energy Corporation ruptured Tuesday morning northwest of Edson, Alberta, sparking a wildfire that fortunately did not threaten any communities. The Calgary-based pipeline operator confirmed the rupture on Tuesday. It said it was working with first responders in the region, including RCMP, Yellowhead County, and Alberta Wildfire. TC Energy says the affected section of the pipeline had been isolated and shut down, and there were no reports of injuries. But an Alberta forestry official says the rupture and ignition had sparked a wildfire in the area that, as of Tuesday night, was being held to about 10 hectares in size. The Transportation Safety Board has sent an investigator to the scene. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 13 points on the day to finish at 21,656. The Dow was down 45 points to 37,753. The S&P 500 was down 29 on the day to 5,022, and the Nasdaq was down 181 points to 15,683. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $2.56 to $82.80 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 2 cents to $1.71 US. Gold was down $21.86 on the day to $23.6103 US an ounce, and silver was up 12 cents to $28.22 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.57 per bushel, barley's at $6.44, canola's at $13.88, and corn is at $7.82 per bushel. Live cattle were down 60 cents to $1.80.90. Feeder cattle were up 8 cents to $2.40.43, and lean hogs mate contract was up 20 cents to $94.93. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 72.61 US. Recapping one of our top stories, jurors deliberated for just over 3 hours before finding 3 men guilty for their roles in the 2022 highway blockade at the Coutts border crossing. The trial for Alex Van Herk, Gerhard George Jansen, and Marco Van Hugenbos lasted just under 2.5 weeks. On Tuesday, the 3 were found guilty of 1 count each of mischief over $5,000 for their part in a protest over COVID-19 government restrictions. The accused could face 10 years in prison and will be sentenced at a later date. They'll be back in court on July the 22nd. The Alberta NDP will be choosing their new leader on June 22nd. Now, coming up shortly, BCN's Naveen Day is going to chat with one of their star candidates, former Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to check out our website anytime to see a bunch of local stories and interviews.
The race is on to replace Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley after almost a decade in the party's top seat. But who will replace her? One of the candidates vying for her job is joining us today. Naheed Nenshi is a household name in Calgary. He served as mayor of the Stampede City for 11 years, and now he is getting his first taste of partisan politics. Naheed, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks so much for having me, Naveen.
Now, you recently made a stop in Lethbridge on your campaign tour, and during your talk, you said that you have worn purple every day for the last 14 years. Now, I'm with you on the purple because it's a great look for men of our complexion.
It
but
is indeed.
This color means something much more symbolic to you. Can you explain?
Sure, and you can't see my purple socks on this framing right now, but there's a purple vase behind me, so you get a little bit of my background there. So, most people understand the real reason I wore purple every day for 14 years is because it looks good on us, right? But it's more than that. A lot of folks get that purple is a mix of liberal red and conservative blue, calling people into what I call the mighty middle. But I think people have misinterpreted that to think it's a left-right spectrum thing. What it really is an invitation. It actually says to people, let's not define ourselves by our ideologies or our past or the camps that we find ourselves in, but rather by our common humanity. And so adding a little bit of purple into the NDP orange is really an attempt to help people think about how they can see themselves in this party, how they can see their own values in this party. So it has been very difficult to find things that are purple and orange. Those colors don't normally go together. And I did manage to get this with a little bit of purple in the orange, but really that's the idea here. It's not about taking over the party and turning the NDP into something that it isn't, but it really is about figuring out if we can invite more people into the home that Rachel Notley and the hardworking volunteers have built in this party over time.
And it's interesting that you brought up the political spectrum because some Albertans believe that the NDP needs to move more to the center to attract more of the popular vote. How do you see it?
I have a very different view of this. I think that issues of left and right are issues that are best left to political scientists and journalists. They don't really make a big difference in everyday people's lives. What really is important is finding the values that people believe in and figuring out how to make sure that we are speaking to those values. And the important thing that I've learned about the New Democrat Party, today's New Democrat Party in Alberta, is that in fact it is already speaking to those values. When we think about strong delivery of public services by the public sector, when we think about looking after the most vulnerable, not punching down on them, giving people a hand up at the moment they need it, fostering a strong economy with a solid eye on the books, all of that, while we're dealing with ensuring that every single Albertan has a life of dignity and prosperity on this land. When you think about those are things that most Albertans believe in, but they're also things that the NDP believes in. And I think the challenge has been that for too many of our friends and neighbors, they don't see themselves in the NDP because they have these stereotypes of what the party is, which I don't think are really reflective of the membership or the caucus of the party today. So my job is to reach out to even more Albertans and help them see that, the conservative movement as it is today, Danielle Smith and her UCP, certainly is not conservative in any way. They are socially regressive. They are financially profligate. They are not investing in the things that the public really needs. I keep saying that I've known Danielle Smith for 30 years. We went to university together, and we took a class together, and the professor was a guy called Peter Lougheed.
Oh, wow.
And I feel like I was paying attention in that class. I'm not sure if she was, but I'm very comfortable in saying that Peter Lougheed would be very uncomfortable with this version of the conservative movement. I'm comfortable in saying that Ralph Klein, who I knew very well, would be uncomfortable in this version of the conservative movement. And in fact, the kind of competent, pragmatic government that Albertans are used to is now much better reflected by the NDP than it ever will be by this UCP and Danielle Smith.
That's very interesting. Now, like I said before, you recently made a stop in Lethbridge on your campaign trail. What were the major concerns you heard from the people of Lethbridge?
It was an amazing stop. I have to admit that I haven't spent a ton of time in Lethbridge. Spent a ton of time at the university and the museums and so on. It's a terrific arts and cultural hub for Southern Alberta. But I wasn't sure what kind of a response I would get arriving in Lethbridge for what was supposed to be a campaign meet and greet and turned out to be a massive rally. We kept moving it to a larger and larger room, and in the end, it was standing room only in a ballroom. The people were incredibly enthusiastic. But what I heard from the folks in Lethbridge is similar to what I've been hearing throughout the province. People are deeply concerned about the future. We feel that we are living at a pivotal moment in history in terms of the future of the economy, in terms of climate change, in terms of equity and how we all live together on this land as the population is growing, and in terms of the delivery of public services. And some specific things that I heard in southern Alberta had to do with drought and the mismanagement of the water resources and how that relates to climate change. We heard a lot about the university and post-secondary education and how the UCP government, Danielle Smith and the UCP government, are systematically starving advanced education. There's a lot of concern about the recent announcement that the provincial government wants to interfere with research funding. There was a great deal of conversation, as there is everywhere in Alberta, about healthcare, particularly in southern Alberta, where we're seeing emergency rooms closed on long weekends because there's no one to staff them. And of course, everyone everywhere is concerned about the cost of living. Our utility rates are the highest in the country. Our auto insurance rates are 2.5 times what they are next door in Saskatchewan. And that is all a direct result of government policy. So by and large, the concerns that the people in Lethbridge had are the ones that I'm hearing everywhere, but with some real specific issues that are focused on southern Alberta.
One of the attendees at the Lethbridge event raised a concern, or she had a concern about underrepresentation of young men in our province's post-secondary institutions. Can you elaborate on this and explain what the province needs to do to incentivize more young men to enroll?
This is a much broader issue than that. It really has to do with how, not just in Alberta, but everywhere, we're seeing movement among young men that is, politically a little more towards the right, but rooted in something much deeper, rooted in the fact that the deal that a lot of young men have made and their fathers have made and their grandfathers have made is not holding up anymore. That if you finish your education, if you finish high school, for example, in lots of parts of Alberta, you can still get a good job, you can get married, you can start a family, you can afford a house, and be able to, move on with your life. And often, for a lot of young people right now, they're just not seeing that dream anymore. Statistics show that people graduating high school now, for the first time since the Industrial Revolution, are likely to be less financially well off than their parents. And this is very disconcerting for young people. It's very disconcerting for their parents. And one of the things we have seen as well is that the participation of young men in post-secondary education is declining. We are seeing that a lot of young men are turning towards risky behaviors early in life. The vast majority of drug poisonings that we're seeing in the province are young men. And so this is an issue that we've been very hesitant to talk about. We've been very hesitant to talk about the rates of self-harm and suicide among young men as well. And I was really interested that retired professor from the University of Lethbridge, who was a woman, raised this issue and saw that she was really seeing this difference. And, good for her for raising it, because there's a lot of things in our community that we don't talk about. And this really needs to be one of them. How do we ensure that young men in our community, young white men in our community in particular, are really feeling part of the community and feeling like they've got a strong future?
Now, you have a lot of experience working with complex organizations and industries. So how would you balance free enterprise and regulated markets? And can we have these two sectors working in harmony?
Yeah, of course we can. And that's how it works best. So if you think about how Canada made it through the 2008 financial crisis, we did so precisely because our financial sector was the best regulated in the world. And that's why we made it through better than most industries have. Now, look, I'm a business professor. I come from the world of big business. I'm a free enterprise guy. But I also recognize the need to ensure that, particularly in the provision of public services, we have a system that is well regulated, because sometimes you will end up with unintended or intended consequences. So a great example of this is in the private provision of long-term care. We have a lot of private long-term care homes in Alberta where they're still publicly funded. So you, as the senior going into one of these homes, will pay the same if you go to a public home or a private home. And often the private homes are nicer. They're newer, they're freshly built, single rooms, that sort of thing. But the way the system is designed is that that private operator gets precisely what the government would pay for that bed. So they have to be able to spend less in order to pay off the construction, pay a profit to their shareholders, and so on. And the only place you can really cut your spending is food and staffing. So the vast, vast majority of people who work in long-term care in Alberta are part-time. They have to work 2 or 3 jobs. They don't get paid benefits. They're doing hard physical labor every day with no hope for advancement. And most of them are women. Most of them are racialized women. Many of them are newcomers. And we've actually designed the system to only work if there's an inexhaustible supply of newcomer women coming to work in this system. And that's not going to work for a long time. We have to make sure that we're treating every worker in the system with dignity, whether they work for a private organization or a public organization. Every single person who goes to work every day in this province needs to be able to live a life without fear, needs to live a life of economic security where they're not worried about their next grocery bill and they're not worried about how their kids are going to do in life. And sometimes government regulation can create exactly the opposite. So we have to make sure that we have the right amount of regulation in the right place to ensure that the private sector can do its job in building the economy, but that government can do its job in protecting people's rights.
What are your thoughts on the arena deal for the city of Calgary? You've been a supporter of it in the past, but only if it was done right. Can you explain?
Well, no, because I made it a big deal to not comment on issues of my successor as the mayor of Calgary. She deserves her space to do the things that she wants to do. I will say that I have always believed that if public money is going into a project, there must be a very clearly defined public benefit. And I think that that is what we worked hard on all deals, including that one, when I was mayor. And ultimately, it'll be up to this city council and this provincial government, which put in some money in it, to explain to citizens what the public benefit of that public money is.
So some say healthcare in Alberta is on the brink of collapse, while others say it has collapsed. Would you agree with the former or the latter? And what changes need to be made with AHS?
It's been on the brink of collapse for some time, and I would argue that in some areas in southern Alberta, it has in fact collapsed. If you cannot count on an ambulance being there when you call 911, or if you cannot count on your emergency room actually having staff to run an emergency room, that's not an effective working healthcare system. And now this is a tough one because when you ask the premier, what's the core problem with healthcare? She's sort of like an onion. You have to peel off layers until she gets to her answer. And the final answer for her on healthcare is, well, AHS spends too much on management. Now, never mind that AHS, when you benchmark it against any other organization, you will see that it actually spends less on management than other health organizations of its size. But what I don't understand at all is if she believes that AHS spends too much on management, then how is creating 4 AHSs, each with their own management layers, actually going to reduce the cost of management? In fact, I would argue that most Albertans would not disagree that AHS needs reform. But I don't think any Albertans would agree, and Danielle Smith and Adriana LaGrange are trusted to do it. It's no doubt that what they do, I have very little faith it's going to work. But here's the issue. If the NDP takes power in 2027, 3 years from now, and we look at an exhausted healthcare workforce, and we say you've just been through this terrible organizational change that nearly killed you, let's do it again. Well, that's not going to work either. And so we have to deal with what we inherited. Part of it is we've got to find the money to adequately fund the system. It's as simple as that. We cannot continue to starve the system and expect the people who work in the system to do heroic things every day, using literally Band-Aids to keep it all together forever and ever. We're going to burn people out. We have burned people out. We're seeing people leave the province in droves in the healthcare professions. So we have to start with funding the system adequately and finding the money to do that. But we also need to start from a place of respect. The UCP government has demonized healthcare workers. They call them union bosses. They fight with them all the time. They show no respect for the work that they do. They tear up their contracts. And so we have to start with a place of serious respect, saying you play an incredibly important role in our community. You're not just a cost center. And we respect and value that work. And together we're going to find a solution that makes sense.
Now, some say Danielle Smith's UCP government has taken a combative approach in dealing with the federal government, particularly with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. How would you build a relationship with the federal government?
Well, I would argue that they've taken a combative attitude towards everything. You know, I've never seen a government so fundamentally disinterested in governing. They're not actually running the province. They're just as I've said, they just know how to do two things: pick fights and waste money. And even, you know, the $100 million on Turkish Tylenol was simply so that they could try and own the federal government, because they knew very well that the federal government's deal that they had made to get actual Tylenol on the shelves was starting to happen, and they wanted to take credit for it. So they wasted $100 million, which is more than they have spent on their signature investment in downtown Calgary. I think it came out to something like $14,000 per delivered bottle of Tylenol. So all they want to do is pick fights and own the libs. And here's the thing. When I was mayor, I had 6 different premiers from 3 different political parties.
Mm-hmm.
I had to work with all of them. I had to make deals for Calgary with every single one of them. I also had about half of my time with a federal government that was conservative and half of my time with the federal government that was liberal. And I managed to secure more funding for the city of Calgary, by the way, something that the government doesn't want us doing anymore, securing federal funding. But I managed to secure more funding for the city of Calgary under both of those governments than any other major city in Canada. So the point is, you make deals. And if we go back to the example of Peter Lougheed, nobody fought more fiercely for Alberta than Peter Lougheed. But he also brought home the deals. He brought home a constitution, for heaven's sakes. And this government is not just incapable of making deals, they're disinterested in making deals because they want to fight forever. Now, the interesting thing will be, should the federal government change, what is Danielle Smith going to do? If she doesn't have Pierre Trudeau or I should say Justin Trudeau to fight with anymore, what is she going to do? She's got no other tool in her case. Even when she talks about me, she talks about Trudeau. She's obsessed. He lives rent-free in her head. And ultimately, we got to get beyond that. We got to make deals with whoever's in power in Ottawa and do what's best for Albertans.
Former Calgary Mayor and Alberta NDP leadership hopeful Naheed Nenshi, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Naveen, and good luck with the good old southern Alberta spring. Could be raining, could be snowing, could be sunny, but we're going to get through this, and spring is coming.
The internet and social media have forever changed our world of relationships. The good news is that we can much more easily keep in touch with people around the world and make some new friends. However, it can make it more difficult to discern who our real friends are. Today's guest joins us from Edmonds, Washington. Dr. Greg Jantz is a psychologist, best-selling author, and founder of The Center, A Place for Hope, one of the top facilities for treatment of depression in America. His latest book is Here Today, Ghosted Tomorrow, When Someone Disappears from Your Life. Dr. Jantz, great to have you back on Bridge City News.
Good to be with you today, and I didn't ghost you. I know it's a funny word, but it's something probably everybody's experienced.
You're absolutely right. We've all experienced it, and especially if you're part of the online dating world. Now, for those of you that don't know what ghosting is, Dr. Jantz, why don't you just tell us how you define ghosting, and is this a new phenomenon?
Let me just say ghosting's a funny word to describe it, but what it means is this. You thought you had a relationship with somebody, you might have thought it was going well, and all of a sudden, they disappear. They don't respond, you reach out to them, and you feel betrayal, you feel rejected, you feel a wide range of emotions, and you feel like, what's wrong with me? So that's in a dating kind of online world, but ghosting can also happen. Maybe a person had a job interview. You confirmed it, that they'd be there. And then they didn't show. They didn't say anything. They disappeared. So what we're talking about is ghosting. And yes, it's been around, but boy, with social media and the online digital world, we just have an easier way of doing it now.
Now, to what extent is it easier today to ignore people we just don't want to engage with than in times past?
Well, I can just decide I'm done with you, and I don't respond. And then it's passive aggressive. I hold the power, and you're desperately trying. What's wrong? What did I say? What did I do? And you're trying to reconnect, but you just keep not responding. And too often, our younger generation, this has been a way of maybe handling a relationship you don't want anymore. The relationship is nearly disposable, and we haven't learned how to um, create a way to solve problems, to actually have a conversation with someone. It's just easier to ghost them, disappear.
Okay, so how does the rejection from ghosting affect a person's self-esteem?
Yes, ghosting will affect you. First of all, as a mental health professional and as a counselor, seeing what this has done to people, you're going to feel that betrayal can really feel deep, and the effects can be, I feel like, what's wrong with me? Did I say something wrong? Did do I deserve this? And so you can easily move into kind of a victim role. And also you can be very angry, you become embittered, you go, I'll never have another relationship. And you can start doing to other people what was done to you. And so be careful about recreating patterns. Somewhere along the line, we've got to intervene and say, I have to forgive this person. That was about them, not about me. I'm going to release them because otherwise I keep carrying around all that pain, and it affects all my future relationships.
So I have a question for you because I've been on some dating apps and I've been ghosted before, and you're right. I do start to question myself. What was it? Something I said? Was it something that I did? But I've also been the one that's done some ghosting, I have to admit, and usually it's because I don't think the conversation is going anywhere, or I have maybe a few conversations going, and I see potential in others. Tell me, Dr. Jantz, is there a specific gender that has a higher chance of doing the ghosting? Because as we know in online dating, women tend to receive a higher volume of messaging than men would.
Yes, and I'm going to make a general statement that a lot of times it may be men who are um, the one that is doing the ghosting.
Oh.
Now that's a general statement, but a lot of times we're not resolving issues, we're not having honest conversations, and so it's just a very injurious thing to do to another person.
Now, you list some of the warning signs that someone might ghost you. Can you just share some of those?
Yeah, one of the first things I want you to do is trust your gut, trust your discernment. Sometimes there may be some early warning signs in a relationship. You go, oh, and you start to see things, but you go, all right, but you ignore it, and then at some point they ghost you. But you probably had some warning signs, maybe how they treated you, how they maybe were late, how they didn't respect your time, maybe the things that they said, maybe they're talking a lot about a previous relationship. That could be a warning sign. So I'm going to say, listen with your heart to any potential warning signs. A person that has a lot of anger, constant irritation, and maybe even some rage, you go, you know what? No, they could be a likely candidate in their anger to just ghost, because ghosting, it really is about power and control. So just be aware. The biggest thing is this relationship being built on trust? And is it a mutual trust? And I sense and I feel that. Or am I allowing things to slide? And so when I'm ghosted, it may not be a huge surprise.
Now, you refer to ghosting as a cowardly act. Why is that?
because you're not dealing with the truth and you're not facing another person and you're not problem solving. You're not talking about what's really going on. You're avoiding the real issues. If I just no longer desire to be in a relationship, that's a conversation to have, not to avoid.
And what are some tips for people that want to end communication or feel that the conversation is going nowhere and just want to wind it down rather than ghosting?
One of the we're gonna wind it down. One of the things is to have that conversation. It's a taking a deep breath and saying, I believe I need to go another direction. I'm just discovering some things about me. Don't blame the other person, but I show gratitude for the time that you've had and so forth. But I don't see this relationship going in that direction. Say those words and listen to the other person. That's always hard to receive, but it's a lot better if we can treat another person respectfully and honorably versus ignoring or ghosting them.
Do you have any advice for those who have felt the sting of rejection from ghosting?
Yes, you felt the sting, you've had an experience, and you might want to just get hurt and angry and just withdraw and isolate and say, I'll never trust another person and I'll never be in another relationship. And that means I've got to forgive. And I need to say, that was about that person, not about me. And therefore, I'm not going to carry ongoing hurt. I'm going to forgive them and whatever is going on for them, because I don't want to drag that into my next relationship. And maybe I have to say that a few times, I'm going to forgive them. Maybe I need to write down in my journal the emotions that I'm experiencing. Maybe I need to prayerfully consider just what would it take for me to really forgive. But forgiveness has to enter the picture.
Well, that's a great segue to my next question, because obviously there's hope for healing after the pain of being rejected. But what are some steps to move on? You mentioned forgiveness.
Yeah. And I don't mean that's a one-time thing. You may need to really work on that. But then I need to stay engaged in relationships. I really do. Maybe I need to join a group with other people. Maybe I need to, even at times where I'm so wounded and struggling so much, if I have a lot of anxiety and depression, then I need to maybe seek some help. What is it? Because we can't carry that anxiety, that distrust. So be sure that you're addressing whatever personal issues there may be so that you can go forward.
Now, with technology and social media, ghosting is easier than ever. Do you have any specific advice for those who have digital relationships?
Make sure it's not only digital. Have a real person, real time relationship. If you're spending 80% of your time in a digital relationship, I'm just going to challenge that's probably not a real relationship. And life is different in the digital world. Life is different in the social media. You use it to communicate, but make sure that you are with that person. And long distance relationships, that when you've never met the person, we tend to have an image and fantasize about what everything's really like. This is why so often people are just shocked. It's not what I thought it was. So I'm for real time relationships.
That's some good advice there. Plus, there's a lot of romance scams out there as well. Now, you include a section at the end of the book titled "Recovering from a Toxic Relationship." Tell us more about that and what can a person do to recover?
Yeah, a toxic relationship is one that was probably emotionally abusive. So emotionally abusive is maybe there was passive aggressive behavior, maybe there were a lot of put downs, maybe there was constant irritability or anger, or maybe you were in an anxious relationship where you're always worried about how they were going to respond. Are they happy with you? So recovery from a toxic relationship means I need to be able to identify what is a healthy relationship? How do I build healthy intimacy? Sometimes we want to be in a relationship and we excuse certain things and we think being in an anxious relationship is normal. And I'm just going to challenge to say, no, let's learn about what is a healthy relationship and let's begin to work on ourselves being healthy. Make sure that I'm not bringing anger, fear, guilt, and shame into a new relationship.
Now, there are some that justify ghosting as appropriate because the person that they're communicating with or their partner is being what they consider toxic. Maybe they're a narcissist, or they're displaying some sociopathic behaviors. So, are there times, perhaps maybe in a codependent relationship, where ghosting is actually appropriate?
Well, you're going to say what you're going to do. So you're going to say, this isn't working out for me, and you're going to. So I want you to know, so it's not a surprise. I'm not going to be engaging or responding to any future text or communication. I just want you to know that. Say what you're going to do, and then stay with it.
And what do you mean by digital distance makes ghosting an ever-present option?
Because there is, I'm not looking at you as a human being. I'm not seeing your reaction. And if it's digital, I can really be kind of powerful. I hold the power if I'm controlling if I'm going to respond to you or not. So it just makes it a lot easier. If you have to see that person real time every day, that's going to be a little harder. But if I can write you off in the digital world and there's distance, it's like, well, it doesn't matter.
Dr. Greg Jantz is the author of Here Today, Ghosted Tomorrow, When Someone Disappears from Your Life. Greg, thanks so much for being with us today.
Good to be with you today.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.